He said Bob Lazar did work at Area 51, but only for a very brief amount of time.
Per qualche imprecisione nostra è perché abbiamo capito quanto sia controverso l'argomento e con il supporto di alcuni followers abbiamo rifatto questo video su Bob Lazar. Speravamo tanto di fare un breve video, ma non è stato possibile. Per chi non conoscesse Bob Lazar, vi raccontiamo brevemente che ha frequentato la Tresper Clarke High School di Westbury a New York. L'unico corso di scienze che ha frequentato è stato quello di chimica. Ha poi studiato elettronica al Pierce Junior College. La credibilità di Lazar è stata immediatamente messa in dubbio quando ha annunciato di aver conseguito anche dei master presso il Caltech e il MIT, affermazioni che sono palesemente false. Non risulta che abbia mai frequentato nessuna di queste due prestigiose università. In effetti il Caltech non ha mai offerto una laurea in tecnologia elettronica o elettronica, contrariamente alle affermazioni di Lazar. Quando nel 93 gli è stato chiesto di nominare i professori che gli hanno insegnato in entrambe le università, Lazar ha proposto il dottor Daxler e Honchfield. Nessuno di loro ha mai lavorato al Caltech o al MIT, mentre un certo William Daxler era al Pierce Junior College e un certo Frederick Honchfield insegnava tecnica e vocazione alla Tresper Clarke High School. I suggerimenti che le credenziali di Lazar siano state in qualche modo cancellate dal governo sono assurdi. Verso la fine degli anni '80 è venuto alla ribalta perché ha sostenuto che gli Stati Uniti avevano un programma di reverse engineering di UFO e che avevano a disposizione 9 UFO. Lui ha lavorato al reverse engineering della propulsione e che erano compartimentalizzati, cioè nessuno dei team di ingegneri sapeva cosa facessero gli altri team. Bob Lazar ha detto che esiste un elemento, il 115, molto pesante, che, parole sue, crea l'antigravità. Ci sembra una definizione azzardata, ma comunque anche su questo argomento abbiamo qualche parziale conferma.
But also just extremely strange, heavy atomic metal, high up in the periodic table arrangements that we don't understand, what the emergent properties are, but there's just a very strange mix of elements.
Oggi sappiamo che almeno sulle dichiarazioni più importanti aveva ragione. Infatti i programmi di reverse engineering sono stati confermati da David Grush. Bob Lazar è stato stigmatizzato, nessuno gli ha creduto, oltre al fatto che qua in Italia lo abbiamo conosciuto solo pochi anni fa grazie a internet. Ma la questione vera è: Bob Lazar conosce tutto in prima persona? Ha effettivamente lavorato alla retroingegnerizzazione? Oppure era il barista dentro l'area 51 e sentiva gli altri parlare, o era quello che controllava i badge? Non lo sapremo mai con certezza. Perché invece di focalizzarvi su Bob Lazar non si ragiona su Steve Justice? Episodio 5. Lui molto probabilmente ha lavorato al reverse engineering e guarda caso non c'è alcuna informazione in giro. Oppure si potrebbe ragionare su Christopher Mellon. Episodio 4. Della dinastia dei Mellon, quelli della università privata Carnegie Mellon. Perché siete affascinati da Bob Lazar? Bob Lazar non fa parte della Disclosure. Altrimenti lo avrebbero intervistato ovunque come gli altri protagonisti. Bob Lazar, nonostante avesse ragione, viene trattato da paria. Probabilmente, e questa è una nostra speculazione supportata solo da Ross Coulthard, lui ha veramente lavorato lì per qualche mese, ma a far cosa? Poi lo hanno beccato a portare fuori informazioni riservate, lo hanno licenziato e trattato da traditore della patria. Noi non abbiamo la verità, questo è solo un nostro parere. Ma nelle successive 6 testimonianze ascolteremo altrettanti pareri. Poi voi deciderete. Ammettendo che sia tutto vero, Bob Lazar racconta di eventi di 40 anni fa, durati poco tempo, poi ha smesso di lavorare nell'area 51. Non pensate che sia meglio ascoltare qualcosa di più recente? Lo capiremo se fossimo nel 2003, ma siamo nel 2023. Oggi abbiamo fiori di testimonianze. Ne abbiamo così tante che non abbiamo neanche il tempo di portarle sul canale. Bob Lazar non è aggiornato, non fa parte della disclosure, non ha mai più lavorato nel settore, racconta eventi accaduti 40 anni fa. Abbiamo anche verificato personalmente che non ha mai fatto parte nemmeno della disclosure del 2001 organizzata da Steven Greer e nemmeno quella del 2013, la Citizen Disclosure, di cui abbiamo 20 video non disponibili su YouTube, nei quali invece, ad esempio, Steven Greer era sempre presente. Siamo in una fase della storia incredibile in cui il governo americano ci sta raccontando la questione UFO. Come abbiamo già detto nei primi episodi, questo processo lo chiamano la disclosure, significa divulgazione. Tra l'altro abbiamo scoperto che il processo si concluderà entro 12 mesi circa, significa che siamo molto avanti. I prossimi che devono parlare sono il Regno Unito, la Francia e l'Italia, che sono stati silenti fino ad oggi. E aspettiamo il tutto nel 2024, come ci ha detto Ross Coulthard. Noi vorremmo tanto sapere chi sarà il portavoce politico in Italia della disclosure. Chi ne parlerà in televisione? Quali programmi TV? Chi saranno gli ospiti? Noi scommettiamo sul colonnello Roberto Dodds, Clar Bruno Vedruccio come tecnico, Roberto Pinotti, padre Gabriele Gionti e probabilmente anche Biglino, magari anche qualche novità. Oggi la To The Stars sta sicuramente preparando i documenti per formare i decisori e comunicatori in Europa, come ci ha spiegato Lou Elizondo, che oggi fa esattamente questo lavoro. Oggi in Italia c'è qualcuno che sta studiando per parlare in pubblico e raccontarci che non siamo soli. Chi sarà? Secondo voi l'Italia chi dovrebbe mettere in prima linea a spiegare a tutti questa cosa? Chi è credibile oggi? Probabilmente la Cristoforetti. E cosa dirà la politica su questo argomento? Saranno uniti o saranno divisi? Facciamo una specie di gara. Scrivete qua sotto chi dovrebbe essere, chi vorreste che sia la persona che vi spiega che non siamo soli. Poi torneremo sull'argomento. Questo è l'evento più importante dell'umanità. Credete che sia semplice comunicarlo in una fase storica in cui nessuno crede più ai governi? Siamo circondati da fake news a cui milioni di persone credono. C'è qualcuno che crede che il vaccino contro il Covid crei un MAC address per ogni persona.
Non ho fatto in tempo. Vediamo.
Sto filmando, eccolo lì, 1, 2,
e
hai
via.
visto che è sparito? No,
Questi
fammi
sono
filmare. Voglio filmare che spariscono da soli. E quello lì, uno solo ce n'è. È apparso e sparito 2 volte, però gli hai fatto la schermata.
Sì.
Secondo voi, quando anche l'Italia dovrà cominciare a comunicare la questione UFO, che cosa succederà? Quante stupidate dovremo ascoltare dette male e spiegate peggio dai mentecatti che scrivono un post su Facebook o dai giornalisti mediocri? Oggi arrivano informazioni distorte anche dagli scettici professionisti, quelli che non dovrebbero avere un bias cognitivo. Come reagiranno loro alla verità? Quindi vorremmo capire perché vi interessa così tanto Bob Lazar, che non conta nulla. Scrivete nei commenti e soprattutto, chi vorreste in Italia a guidare la disclosure? A raccontarci che non siamo soli nell'universo? O sul pianeta? Per usare una frase di Lou Elizondo, noi pensavamo di essere i gestori dello zoo. Oggi sappiamo che siamo solo un'altra specie nello zoo. Chi spiegherà questa cosa?
Well,
What's your
I
take on
found
him,
his
though?
explanations curious.
Yeah, how so?
The complexity of it, and the fact that he talked about Laurentium, for example, and then decades later, it turns out that apparently there is a more stable form of that than
That's element 115.
sounds right. I couldn't tell you for
But
sure.
it's called Laurentium.
Laurentium.
That sounds like something from Battlestar Galactica. You know, we need the
This
Laurentium
all this stuff
to power
takes
the
you
ship.
into that,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So now I'm a little skeptical about his claims, I have to say. A friend of mine claims to know the gal who was his supervisor when he worked out there and knows what he was actually doing and where he was located, and claims that that he was a guy who checked radiation on badges.
That's it.
Yeah,
And so all the rest is fiction.
according to that story.
And this is a person that you know?
Yeah,
Maybe that person's full of shit.
maybe.
How about that?
You know,
Maybe
I
they
don't
work for
have
the
ground
government.
truth on this,
Yeah.
but
It's
but
interesting.
he did falsify his educational records, and he's been involved in some other things, and it just doesn't.
You
track
talking about
with
the
what,
MIT records?
Yeah.
Yeah. He explained that to me. He said that he was working on something for the government and they sent him to MIT to learn something. And I can't say too much. I'll tell you off air because he told me not to talk about it. But it makes more sense when you hear his description of it, that essentially it wasn't documented that he was studying there, because what he was doing was really a terrible thing, a terrible experiment they were working on. When I explain it to you, maybe it'll make more sense.
Okay.
Maybe not, though. Maybe he's full of shit. Maybe he lied about that. What's interesting, though, is he's told the same exact story since the late 80s. And he doesn't seem full of shit. Now, some people are really good at lying. And, I've been tricked before, and I'm sure you have, too. There's some people that are just sociopaths. They're really good at...
Yeah, they don't even know they're lying. They're convinced in their own head while they're spinning it.
He's obviously very intelligent, and he obviously knows a lot about science. He knows a lot about propulsion systems, and he really did work at Los Alamos, which is interesting because he's actually on the employee roster.
Yeah.
And they tried to say that he didn't. He knew people that were there. He knew the layout of the building. When he went there with George Knapp, they went through the building. He knew exactly where everything was, and he knew the people that worked there. So he really did work there, apparently, allegedly. His story, what's interesting to me is that, again, it's the same story over and over and over again. And then what's also interesting to me is that he knew and took friends to a place where they were testing these things out. And he knew where it was, and he knew when they were doing it, and he brought his friends out there, and that's when they got arrested. And
it's a very, I think there's some consistency there. That is hard to explain. How would he know where to go and what was going on? There are some possible answers to that. I've poked into this a bit. Supposedly, there was a bar off base where the scientists and a lot of the aviators and people would go and hang out. He was frequented that place and picked up information. So, I hear stories on both sides of this. I don't know what the ground truth is, and I remain skeptical. But hey, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
I enjoyed his company. I went to dinner with him and Jeremy, and I talked to him for several hours on the podcast and off the podcast. I don't know, I don't. But it's a weird one because he never made any money doing that. He never made any money telling that story.
I'll tell you another story offline. We can exchange stories offline.
I've found Bob Lazar's materials to be extremely convincing. And Bob Lazar, the movie, to me, is unfortunately about the question of, is his testimony real, and is he real, and all of that, which I am not the least bit interested in. I am interested in the part where he discusses the small segment of the UFO craft that he was allowed to work on, and where he did know exactly how the parts were manufactured. But he did not say anything about how they worked. And I'm convinced that what he was describing is the UFO's brain. Now, in my lecture and in the free volume, I discuss how the very difficult for physics to swallow instantaneous propagation of information through the universe exceeding the speed of light, now measured to over 100,000 times the speed of light. That's the speed of quantum, and it might as well be instantaneous if it's that fast. I believe that all of that shows that there is coherence within the universe beyond what's traditionally understood right now, and that the spacecraft brain that Bob Lazar he didn't say it was the brain, but he described its form. And I believe that what it does is it has amplifying sensors in that cap, in that dome that we see on the top of the craft. And you know that people who've been on the craft and have been shown, been given the tour, talk about the big crystal that's above the brains, the minds of the operators. If you look at Bob's sketch, you realize that the crystal is at the focus or at the center of the detectors. So I believe that this part of the spacecraft is doing what I'm trying to say the human brain and the computer is doing. Namely, it's taking information about where it is along coherent paths in the universe and comparing that to a picture of the overall structure of the universe. And that informs the craft if it's getting closer to its destination, which is in the minds of the operators below the prism. So I believe that that's the basic function of the UFO in what we call interstellar mode. There is also another mode for the spacecraft that's again described in good detail by Susie Hansen, who was taught to operate the spacecraft. It describes the falling leaf operation and seen in the spacecraft's motion and all of those things. And I believe that that's a different mode of spacecraft operation.
Local travel.
For local travel, that's right. It's what we call the pickup.
Last question. You're talking about Lazar and the occupants, whoever they were, the pilots. They were a necessary component of how this thing functions. So us trying, if we have those craft, us trying to duplicate that, we're going to have a hard time, I would think.
I think you're right about that, but I think there are some fairly simple solutions. And so since I'm not in the business of operating and making these craft, I haven't really explored that in any depth, but I believe there are some simple solutions.
But I can tell you that this is information that came from somebody, direct knowledge of what was then a crash retrieval program involving non-human technology at Area 51. And he said that his relative never went public because he wanted to live out a quiet and peaceful retirement. He said Bob Lazar did work at Area 51, but only for a very brief amount of time, and didn't know as much as he states publicly about how the craft functioned. Most of it is fabricated nonsense. Now, this is not my view. Please don't attack me. They could never figure out how the craft worked, nor could they even open it. S4 is only a group of radio communication equipment on top of Papoose Mountain. There are no hangars built into the base of the mountain housing 9 sources, as Lazar claims. My source said he admires George Knapp, and he's mostly on the right track except for Bob Lazar. Sorry, George. There was no way he could have smuggled the close-up, crystal-clear photograph of the egg-shaped craft out of Area 51. Everyone's belongings and vehicles are constantly searched in and out of the facility. No one wants to lose their job or face other repercussions, so no one takes the risk. People work there for the long haul. It's a nice place to work.
And oh, by the way, the Tic Tac is powered very much on how Bob Lazar describes the vehicles that he worked on. It's powered by element 115. It creates a gravitational field, and you can move things around really fast. Okay. You could use that for good, like, wow, I can generate this incredible amount of power. I can really change mankind, and it'll be used for the good. But eventually, that technology will end up in the wrong hands. Now think about it, where I've got this thing, and if it performs like what we saw, I can have it here in Portsmouth. I load it up with something bad, like a weapon. I go, it goes straight up into space, it goes to wherever it is, it comes straight back down, and it does this in a matter of seconds. It goes up, down, down, lands in the middle of a city, sets a fuse for 3 seconds, drops it out the door, closes up, and it's gone.
What do you make of Bob Lazar's story in terms of possession of aircraft? Do you believe him?
I don't believe in the Bob Lazar story, to be quite honest. I mean, Jeremy Corbell has done a great job interviewing him and has done some, beautiful documentaries. I just don't. I don't know how to interpret it, and and again, there's some of the people who I fraternize with think it's all rubbish. But maybe he's right, but I don't know. I mean, the problem is, and this is a little bit different about how I approach the whole area than a lot of others. I'm less interested in going over old paperwork and all these old histories of who said what, the whole he said, she said of the history of UFOs. Mm-hmm. I'm a scientist. I worked on the brain area because it's something I can collect data on. I can go back to the same individual, collect their MRI again, and redo it. I can hand that MRI to somebody else. They can analyze it. I can get materials. I can analyze them. I can get some of these skeletons. I won't touch any skeletons ever again, but I can analyze it and somebody else can reproduce the data.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm good at. And so, you know, I'm not going to go into the whole, I'm not a historian.
What's element 115?
Element 115 is a super heavy element. It's something that we've only just recently synthesized. We only made 4 atoms of it, but the craft uses larger quantities of it, 223 gram little triangles of it. But it's a unique element. When it's exposed to radiation, it produces its own gravitational field, its own anti-gravitational field, and it's what's used to lift and propel the craft and create distortions around it. It's an amazing material, and it's certainly nothing that occurs here or naturally.
And it can be weaponized, and that's kind of the issue here. If this story is all true, that can be weaponized.
Absolutely.
So it's the reactor here powering the gravity amplifiers. Gravity amplifiers output goes into the gravity emitters at the bottom, and the resulting gravity beam or anti-gravity wave can be pretty much put anywhere you want to. And I had access and was permitted to view and look at the operation of this main level with the gravity amplifiers and the level below the gravity emitters. And people call these large black rectangular areas on the top portholes. I believe they were some planar sensor array that just took in information from the surrounding area, whether it be patterns of stars.
Bob Lazar is not a physicist. Bob Lazar is what's called a useful idiot of the military-industrial complex who's been given a certain amount of information. Actually, that comes from stuff I was working on in the 70s with Abdus Salam at the, some of when he talks about gravity A and gravity B, that's what was called the Salam theory, the F gravity, strong, short range gravity, part of the nuclear physics. Yeah, that part has some truth in it, although he doesn't explain it properly because he's not a physicist, okay?
Let me see if I can regurgitate my layman view of how he explained it. He explained that there was a reactor inside of this sport model UFO saucer, that when the saucer went from horizontal to vertical, it flew belly first. And what it did was it sort of displaced matter in front of it so that when the thing moves from left to right, it sort of falls.
Okay, it doesn't. Okay, number one, I don't think that's probably your error. I don't think he said matter. He said it displaces the vacuum, displaces the space itself.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay, yeah, not matter. That's different. But yeah, and that's warp drive. That's what I'm talking about. It's warp drive. So he had part of what he says is true, but it's sloppy. It's not done properly. But when he gets to the nuclear, the 115, you don't need any of that. You don't need that 115.
The element 115.
Yeah, it's stupid. It doesn't, and he never explains. Suppose I have a stable isotope of element 115. What's the equations that show me how that affects the? How does that warp space? Show me how to do that. He doesn't know how to do that because it can't be done. See, it's bullshit. That's what's called pseudophysics. That's a story for idiots, but that's a story he's been given. He's like Benowitz, the Benowitz story. He's been, okay, I can see. I was Lazar. He's like an all-American kid, and he's intelligent. He's a good salesman. He's articulate. Okay, he presents himself well, especially back in the 80s. And actually, he was into warp drive before I was. So somebody had told him. I mean, it's only later that I really realized it was warp drive. Only actually last 20 years maybe. Because see, this is time travel. So I think what's happening is that, and I'm speculating now, is that the stuff that we're going to build, Sarfati Space Corporation, okay, is going to make, that some of that stuff was sent back in time to the 80s, to Area 51, where Lazar comes into the picture. Maybe the time travelers, who go back to Area 51. I'm spending, this is speculative. I'm not saying this really happened, but it would make sense. This is a possible explanation. And so the the guy from the future came back and told Lazar, or told some of the guys there, the scientists there, who then told the Tsar, but they watered it down. They gave what's called disinformation. What did you call it?
Limited hangout.
Limited hangout. They gave that, yeah. So what
something
it is.
a little bit, a sliver of something that's true.
Yeah. And what it,
but not the whole pie.
Yeah, but, yeah, right. And also that may be done deliberately so that straight physicists like me would right away dismiss, oh, this is crazy, which is part of the stigma, the whole stigma, because they don't want the Russians to know, they want the Chinese, whatever, national security, all that kind of crazy stuff, okay? So that could be. So I was actually surprised when I actually first listened to Lazar talk about gravity and gravity B, because that's kind of what I'm working on, but he didn't explain it the way I would explain it. So he had a piece of it without really understanding it. And again, as I said yesterday, there are different levels of physics. There's community college, right? Associate degree. There is 4-year college, undergraduate, bachelor degree. There's the master's level and then the PhD level. Lazar is a smart associate degree level type electrical technician, physics technician. That's what his job was when he was, he's not, and he lied. The problem is he lied about his academic background. He said he went to MIT and Caltech. He didn't.
Right. There's no evidence of it. But there's an argument to the MIT thing. There's an argument that if someone like Los Alamos wanted him to acquire some sort of specific knowledge, they could have sent him to MIT covertly to sort of learn something as part of some dark problem.
That's possible.
Program.
That's possible. But it's clear to me that Lazar doesn't know any math. He doesn't know physics. He doesn't know. He's not a theoretical. See, if he were to write down equations, and I could tell right away. But he's just given a script. He's reading off a script. He didn't create this. It's not his creation.
Right.
And he's reading off a script that somebody gave him. Now, the people who gave him that script, they may know what I'm talking about. But it wasn't Lazar. We don't know who Lazar spoke to back in Area 51.